Welcome, and thanks for stopping by to take a listen. Here I'm presenting a history of Bridgeport Township, Michigan. This was published in the History of Saginaw County, Michigan by James Cooke Mills in 1918. Now, before I delve into this, I'd like to also mention to you that when I first started my channel here on YouTube last year in October, one of the first videos I put up was Mike Morrison's History of Bridgeport, and my name is Dennis Michael Morrison, and it was a history of Bridgeport, based on a history of Bridgeport actually, that I wrote for the Bridgeport Future newspaper back in 1969, that publication being overseen by the JCs of the community at that time. I can't remember now what all my source materials were. A lot of them were older people that were living in the village at that time: Ella Preeter, Pon Neighborly, Bertie Thomas, Emmett Robinson, and others, I'm sure. This history of Bridgeport Township will take us from its humble origins up through 1918. And if you haven't watched my other video on the history of Bridgeport Township, I'd suggest that you take a look at it. That has a nice background music soundtrack and such, and I think you'll enjoy it. But I hope that you'll also enjoy this one. So, without further commentary, I bring you the history of Bridgeport Township. One of the oldest settlements in Saginaw County was on land included in Bridgeport Township when organized, and the town comprised practically all of the eastern portions of the county. As early as 1819, Ariel Campeau, who was a brother of Louis Campeau, who built the first log house at Saginaw City, located land on the banks of the Cass River on what is now Section 30 of Frankenmuth Township. It was a beautiful rolling country through which the stream meandered with many sharp bends, and on the farm, which was literally cut out of the dense forest, the parents of the Campeaus lived and died. These were the first deaths in the township, the victims being carried off by the same disease which had reduced the Indian populations in 1837, I believe smallpox. The first white child born in the township of Bridgeport was Henry Campeau, son of Ariel, which event occurred in the latter part of 1833. Daniel Ellis came to Bridgeport in 1837, arriving there by the Indian Trail from Birch Run. He assisted in building the first roads in the township. His marriage to Miss Matilda Lesia on January 14, 1846, was the first wedding solemnized in this section of the county. Other early pioneers were Dennis Bow, Eliza Miller, Lily Cook, and Mrs. And then there was a Kenny, Welding, Garland, Campbell, and Beach. And actually, Noah Beach was the first township supervisor of Bridgeport, and his son Hatton Beach served the North in the Civil War. Primitive settlements. On the spot now known as Cass Bridge, Lily Cook started a village which he called Bridgeport because of the fact that it was at the point where the Flint Trail crossed the Cass River. It was his intention to make the village the chief trading place in the township, and a tavern and post office were established, continuing there for a number of years. Like some other embryonic settlements, Cass Bridge did not realize the expectations of its founders, and no trace of that settlement now remain. Charles A. Lowell, who was the first to sow wheat in Saginaw County, had meanwhile settled on the site of the present village, to which he gave the name of Bend of the Cass, or Cass Bend. The river makes a sharp bend, I should say, at this place, and the location and natural surroundings favored the growth of a permanent settlement. Mr. Lowell built a tavern which he called the Bridgeport Center House, and succeeded in locating several industries there. In 1849, Thomas and Green built a sawmill in the village, and a shingle mill was soon afterwards started in operation by a man named Hidley. And the shingle mill was afterwards converted into a blacksmith shop by Mr. Lowe, who in 1856 built a large sawmill on the banks of the Cass River. Lumbering was the chief industry. The cork pine of the Cass River, which produced straight, clear logs of large size, were cut at these mills, as well as those which had been built on the Saginaw. And because of its fine quality, the lumber quickly attained a high reputation in the East. Bridgeport cork pine was very well revered. In a period of less than 40 years, more than 1 billion feet of logs were rafted from this stream, practically all of which passed the village of Cass Bend, or Bridgeport Center, as the place afterwards became known. Excuse me. Darwin A. Pettibone and Company built a shingle mill in 1862, which was operated very successfully for 4 years until it was destroyed by fire. Mr. Hidley and others erected another shingle mill, and for several years the manufacture of shingles was a prosperous industry in Bridgeport. Bridgeport shingles became widely known through the state because of excellent quality and extremely long life, and it is said that until quite recently some of the oldest houses in Saginaw had upon their roofs shingles made in Bridgeport in the 1860s. Salt was also made. Upon the discovery of salt brine in Saginaw Valley in 1860, and the success attained the manufacture of salt on the river, the people of Bridgeport became interested in this industry. Darwin A. Pettibone drilled a well in 1862 in connection with his shingle mill and erected a salt block. The brine was of excellent quality, but for some reason or other this block was not a profitable venture and later was destroyed by fire. In 1863, Charles A. Lowe drilled a well to a depth of 600 feet and built a salt block, the work being done by Leonard Blake. After operating for a short period, these works were dismantled and at length fell into decay. The great salt business of Saginaw overshadowed that of smaller places on the river, where the genius which made it a success there seemed to be lacking. Nothing further was ever done to revive these industries or to develop the natural resources which lay beneath the soil there. After the timber began to be cleared away and the land drained, the progress of agriculture was quite rapid, and the need arose for a grist mill at the bend of the Cass. In 1878, John and Martin Mesner erected a flour mill on the site of the old Hidley shingle mill. The mill was 30 by 40 feet in size and had 2 runs of stone, and one for grinding wheat into flour and the other for making feed. With a limited capacity of 3,000 barrels of flour annually and 50 bushels of feed per day, this mill was scarcely able to meet the local demand, but it saved many miles of hauling for farmers in the neighborhood who otherwise would have been compelled to drive to Saginaw or to Frankenmuth. Organization of the Township. Bridgeport was organized as a township in 1848 under authority given by the Board of Supervisors and comprised nearly all the eastern portions of the county. At later dates, other towns were organized and taken out of the original township so that only a full town 6 miles square remained. Buena Vista Township lies on the north, Frankenmuth on the east, Tamath on the south, and Spalding on the west. The Cass River enters the town in Section 25 and flows northwest through the village of Bridgeport and enters Spalding Township in Section 13, while Fish Creek and other minor streams wind their way through the sections. The land is capable of high cultivation, and the enterprise of the farmers who settled in the township has made it one of the best in the county. The first election was held on April 4, 1848, and the ballot box used being a small hand box or trunk, which until recent years was a valued relic owned by the descendants of one of the original settlers of the place. The records of the first meeting, however, were lost and nothing is now available back of 1868, but it is supposed that all official records were destroyed many, many years ago. In 1868, when the population of the village was about 500, Dennis Bow was supervisor, George J. Hill was clerk, George Miner was treasurer, and Leander L. Hill was justice of the peace of the township. And by 1881, the population had dwindled to 239, and the entire population of the township was only 1,405. In 1918, the township officers were F. Lideline, supervisor, John L. Irish, clerk, Charles Gurmus, treasurer, and L. Nuriter, highway commissioner. Churches were very important in Bridgeport Township. The first church in Bridgeport Township was organized in 1844 by Reverend Brackett, a Wesleyan Methodist. J.B. Garland, was leader, and the members were Daniel Ellis and wife, Mrs. Eliza Miller, Peter Liasia, Alonzo Crosby and wife, and a few others. Mr. Payne was a local minister and worked about 3 years at this place, clearing land for the settlers and other labor incident to life in a new country, and preached on Sunday. He went to Lower Saginaw, or Bay City, in 1852. Elder Jason Steele came here in 1850, and during his ministrations a frame school was used for holding divine services. He was followed in 1853 by Elder I. Andrews and others until 1857, when Reverend Curtis Mosher came to East Saginaw and extended his labors into Bridgeport Village. He was a successful revivalist, and many were converted, a Methodist Episcopal class being organized, including nearly all of the original Wesleyan classes. In 1860, the Reverend Mosher was succeeded by the Reverend Brown, and by Reverend H. O. Parker. In 1865, there were two classes, one being at the village, presided over by D.F. Foster, and the other in the southern portions of the township with J.B. Garland as leader. But dissensions soon arose between the leaders, was carried to the members, and the classes unfortunately broken up. About this time, Reverend B.W. Zinni, a local preacher, illiterate, but an earnest, zealous worker, and a Mason by trade, organized a class of the Methodist Protestant sect, with 18 members, some of the old ME class joining it. The building of a church edifice had begun, and it was proposed that the Methodist Protestants should furnish half of the money needed, and the Methodist Episcopalians the other half. The Protestants were to have the use of the building for preaching once each Sunday, and to use it such evenings as the ME class might designate the church edifice to be the latter's property. The Methodist Protestants, of course, rejected this proposition, and the conference ended. The leader of the ME class then tried to interest the Methodists of Saginaw County in the building project, but received no aid, but was advised to consult the members of the Congregational Society, and he did so and raised $400 or $500, the first church of the Congregational faith being the final result of his labors. Professor Easterbrook was the first visiting pastor. Now in 1866, the People's Church was organized with material aid from another society, which had free use of the church edifice whenever they wanted, but other denominations could use it only when their appointments did not conflict with the work of the others. Elder T.H. Beamish was pastor of the church in 1869, but 2 years later, an Englishman, Reverend W.H. Bakewell, was sent to minister to the people. The results of his labors were very meager, and in 1873, Reverend James Riley came to Bridgeport in the hopes of reorganizing the class. He did not succeed, but later, in the southern part of the township, his labors met with great success. The Methodists of Bridgeport Village attended the Congregational Church in 1878, but in the following year there was no preacher of the latter church. Reverend E. E. Castor of East Saginaw preached every alternate Sunday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but later the Reverend Edwin Foster was sent to look after the flock. He found a very discouraging state of affairs. No class, no members to receive him, no foothold of any kind. Nothing daunted, he bought a house and a lot in the village, giving his horse for the first payment, and went to work in earnest. Within a year, he had a large class, and his salary of $500 a year had been promptly paid. He was followed in 1881 by Reverend William Chappell, a native of Cornwall, England, but an enthusiastic admirer of his adopted country. From that time, the religious life of the little community was greatly strengthened, and there were bright prospects of future usefulness of the church in Bridgeport. A typical country village. The village of Bridgeport is situated on the main trunk line road from Saginaw to Detroit, being an extension of Genesee Avenue in the former city and of Woodward Avenue in Detroit. It is only 6 miles from the business centers of Saginaw, and because of its proximity to this center of trade and industry, there is little need of stores or other business establishments of its own. Its residents come to the city for the most part for the goods that they require and to attend the theater and other places of amusement. The village has excellent railroad facilities, being on the line of the Pere Marquette and the Michigan Railway, the later furnishing rapid electric traction to Saginaw, Flint, and to Frankenmuth. Bridgeport is a typical country village of about 300 inhabitants, and so situated amid beautiful surroundings as to be the mecca of Saginaw people in their summer outings and picnics. Some have, from time to time, made their home in the village, going to and from their business in the city daily. Its principal residents, however, are retired farmers who have made comfortable competences during their active days of farming, and these generally have comfortable residences with modern conveniences and form an important part of the population.